Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Shoes Off Inside with May, Kelly, and Tamlyn. How are you guys?
Hi.
Now everyone is somewhere else now. Kelly is in
Yes.
New York.
I'm still in New York. Yeah.
Tamlyn, you're in Canada somewhere.
I'm in Vancouver shooting a new series that I cannot announce yet, but it's really fun and we're looking forward. Yeah, I can't wait to announce. So it'll be here when I can.
Exciting. And I've said this to you ladies before. I'm so proud of the fact that these amazing Asian American actresses, you know, in their 50s are doing so well and still getting roles and showing it off. So I'm so proud of you both.
I am showing off more than I would like to on BMF. Let me tell you.
What do you mean?
Oh, when you got it, you got it. Do it. Flaunt it. Oh,
well, you know, it's nerve-wracking, right? When you've got to, you know, you're going to have to bear some.
Yeah.
I never had to do it. I like always managed to be able to avoid it all throughout my career when I was in my 20s and 30s.
Really?
And now, you know, everybody on BMF gets naked at some point, you know, has some sort of love scene.
So how
whatever.
naked are you getting?
I don't want to reveal just how revealing I'm getting.
That's pretty big of a spoiler alert. It's like, oh, I'm showing more than I have. It's like, oh my God. But
yeah,
okay,
but I have to say it was nerve-wracking.
I know, you still look hot.
I know
but I went through craziness, working out, dieting, trying to get in shape for these scenes, this scene.
Sure.
And let me tell you, it was hard work.
Yeah, and you're getting paid to do it. And that's because you look so fantastic. It's like
I lost 13 pounds. Ooh. I lost 13 pounds because I still had my pandemic weight when we started the show. And then I had to get in shape because I didn't want to just like look good for my age. I wanted to look amazing for any age, right?
You want to look good, yeah.
Right?
Wow.
And I didn't want to just be thin. I wanted to be in shape.
You wanted to be fit. Yeah.
Fit.
Exactly.
And so I did it the hard way. You know, I worked out, I dieted, I counted every single macro that I put in my mouth for 5 months. It was ridiculous.
13 pounds in 5 months. That's a lot of weight loss.
That's a lot.
It's a lot of weight, but it's actually, you know, it's doable, and it's about as much as you should be losing.
Okay.
Right? In that amount of time.
Okay. So I've always wanted to know, because I'm not an actor, like, is it nerve-wracking to do like love scenes and, you know, like you're saying, getting naked or whatever, semi-nude, I don't know. But I would think it would just be like so weird, like doing that.
It's not only weird that you're doing it choreographed with somebody that you actually have no relationship with whatsoever, maybe not even attracted to sometimes, you know, like you have to kiss sometimes guys that you have zero attraction to. But there's also like at least 10 other people in the room staring at a monitor.
Exactly.
Watching. It's so uncomfortable.
That's what I would think.
You know, I wish I had the power to make everybody in the room sit in their underwear while I did this kind of scene. You know, I don't have that kind of pull.
Yeah.
But like seriously, I hate it. It's so nerve-wracking.
It's not fun, and that's when I think we really can pat ourselves on the back, saying the best we can do is try to elicit whatever feeling it is necessary to, you know,
make
is
it
it romantic? Is it sexy? Is it hot? Is it
sweet?
Acting.
Right.
And it's just, again, what the word is choreographed every single moment. It's a smoky, dirty, dusty set because it's not clean. It's not a hotel room or anything like that.
No.
And it's usually cold on a set.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But you know what? You know what they do have now that they didn't have when I was in my 20s and 30s doing these things? Intimacy coordinators.
Correct.
Oh, yes, I've heard of those.
So now everyone has an intimacy coordinator on their set.
Right.
Even if you just do a kissing scene, there's a scene that I'm, you know, I'm doing that we're not even making contact. We're not kissing or anything, but we
Right.
have an intimacy coordinator because we're in bed and we are, supposed to look as though we had, finished. It's like post, right? And there could be something that could be possibly uncomfortable with the situation.
Right.
So out of, extra caution, they
Ah,
bring intimacy coordinators on. And I have to say, this is the funny thing. When you have a kissing scene now, there's an
Yeah.
intimacy coordinator that comes with like mouthwash. And they tell you, don't
Yeah.
brush your teeth 2 hours before because there could be small abrasions in your mouth from brushing your teeth and your gums and whatever, and like bacterias could get in there. So like 2 hours before, don't brush your teeth, but just before you kiss, every take they offer you mouthwash.
huh.
Yeah.
To be
Yeah,
sanitary.
Sure.
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
sanitary
Okay.
and
Okay.
respectful of whoever it is that you're kissing.
So I'm going to ask a question that I've always wondered. So
What?
maybe the two of you can answer this. I've always wondered about the guy, right? In a sex scene or an intimate scene, right? I mean, we can kind of control externally what happens to our bodies, right? But what about them? Like, what if they get a big boner? Like, do they?
Here's the thing. They wear these well, first of all, they're wearing undergarments, or they're
Well,
wearing pads that tape
Mhm.
down, and we do too.
Mhm.
So we're wearing what would be like sort of a reverse maxi pad, sort of, right?
uh-huh.
But in
Mhm.
skin color.
Okay.
And
Okay.
you're taped shut. So if you have to go to the bathroom, all that has to peel off and you got to tape some other one back on.
So the guy's
so that
willy
there
is
could
taped
not
down.
possibly be a penetration. There's padding
So there's
there.
no action.
Also, by the way, there's 10 other people in the room. It's
I know, but
not
still, I'm just saying.
romantic or sexy
Okay.
at all.
I get it. But sometimes when I watch some of these sex scenes in, TV or, what films, it's so intimate. And like,
And it's made to look that way. This
right.
is where
But
the
I'm
acting
like,
comes in.
how can the guy not have a big boner? So I guess it's taped
Because
down. So
all
it's
of
taped
that.
down.
It's taped, and
Yeah.
even if he does, unless it's super strong, like,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
going
They
through
have
all the
ways. They have
They have
ways.
ways.
Yeah.
Okay. I've always wondered that just because. But you do hear about romances starting between stars
Absolutely.
because they are
Right.
supposed to be
Absolutely.
romantic and all that. And so something happens, clearly, right? Okay.
Right.
See,
Right.
even
Right.
Aggie's like, I want to know. That's her barking in the background. Okay. Anyway, all right. So now that we've gotten that figured out. And then Tamlyn, you're in Canada. And so we're all in separate places right now. And speaking of,
Mhm.
actually, Kelly, you were talking about weight loss. That's a
Yeah.
perfect segue into something I want to talk about very briefly,
Yes.
which is this whole trend in people using a prescription drug called Ozempic, which is for
Right.
diabetes, right? And it's actually a shot. It's a needle. It's not a pill. You have to you have to like shoot yourself, with a needle. And so apparently the side effect is pretty dramatic weight loss. Okay. So
Okay.
now people are getting it from their doctors, and doctors are prescribing it willy-nilly for people to lose weight. And guess what the result of that is? There's a shortage now of this diabetes drug for people who actually are diabetic. Okay?
It's awful.
It's
That is
awful.
absolutely awful.
This story makes me really
Yeah.
mad because it just is yet another example of how shallow and superficial and selfish people can be. And I hate to rag on your industry, but a lot of celebrities are doing this.
Mm,
And
I'm surprised anybody's admitting to it.
well, they're not admitting to it, my dear. They're not
Oh.
admitting to it.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It's just being
But
assumed.
what is Ozempic used for diabetic patients for? Does it regulate
The
their blood
insulin.
sugar? Do you know?
It's regulating the insulin levels.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
so so how does it affect
Wow.
a normal person, like a person that doesn't have diabetes? I can only imagine it's gotta
So
screw
apparently
something
what
up.
it does, because I know some people who have used it and are using it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I know somebody who's doing it too.
Yeah. So they
Yeah.
say it completely kills the appetite. So you don't eat.
Okay.
So
And
or
that's why
that's
that's
why
why they're losing weight
that's
rapidly?
and also it's supposed to do something to your glucose glucose levels, right? So it's
Oh,
all of that
okay.
chemistry that works in the body, I suppose, but it is definitely a major appetite suppressant, apparently. And so
Okay.
people are losing weight really quickly, and celebrities are using it to, of course, lose weight and look better. And then they're claiming, they're putting themselves on Instagram and new outfits and bikinis and showing off their new bodies. But then it's like, they're not saying it's because of this drug. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
damaging, it's just further damages the whole, body dysmorphia, and body consciousness, and people like, feeling like, well, I want to look like that. And so they're all running to their doctors, and these doctors are being irresponsible too by giving the prescriptions to people who don't need it.
That
capitalist
is
society. Yeah,
something
yeah.
that I think these people need to be,
Yeah.
held responsible.
Conscientious of, or help. Well, again, what is the responsibility? It's like, if I can pay for it, I'll get it. But
Yeah.
again, it's the moral issue, and it's an
It is.
ethics issue, and
Completely. Completely.
just,
And yeah.
just be better people. It's like, if you're and to acknowledge that there is a shortage of this drug that is, important for true diabetic persons to get. It's like, can you do the right thing?
Yeah.
It's like,
I have a
that's
friend.
where I start to question. Yeah.
I have a friend who's diabetic, and he just told me, I couldn't get any Ozempic because it's
Fuck,
it's all
yeah,
out.
it's like,
So my
yeah.
doctor had to get a different, insulin drug for me to take.
That
Can
sucks.
you fucking believe that?
Yeah.
I know. I mean,
But
that's
this is our society today. Everybody wants everything so fast. Nobody wants to have to work for it.
no,
Right.
exactly.
And everybody's just looking for the quick fix. I mean,
Yeah.
And then to lie about, and then to claim like, oh, this is from all hard work, and it's like, really? Really? Okay. Yeah. And so that fucks up normal people and girls, of course, who see all these images.
Exactly, because again, you're feeding into that system of,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
did
I
this in 2
know.
days.
It's such a bummer. So anyway, Kelly, you did it the honest, hard way.
it was so hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Good for you. Good for you. All right. So
Good for you.
anyway,
Congratulations.
well,
You're still
you.
hot, baby.
yeah.
Ah,
So I just have to share this really, really quick story about my mom that I just learned. Okay. My mom, her birthday is this Saturday, February 11th.
Oh,
And,
I'm on that 13th.
yeah. So I just found out just a couple days ago that she's actually not turning. I thought her birth year was 1937. So did my brother.
Mhm.
So did we all.
Mhm.
Apparently, no, her birth year is 1936. And we never
Mhm.
knew
Oh, did
this.
she do the Korean thing?
No. That
Yeah.
has
Where they count extra?
nope. The Korean
What?
thing is an extra year because of the gestation
Yes.
year, but her actual birth year, this whole time I thought was 1937 because that's what she's always said. We just found out that she is actually 1936, which makes her 87.
Older.
Which means that if you add the gestation year for the Koreans do, which actually is going to be abolished soon in Korea, she's going to be turning 88. That's why all of her other sisters and relatives besides us were like, what are you going to do to celebrate your 88th birthday? Because it's the big birthday. And my brother and I are like, what the hell are you talking about?
What the hell are you talking
She's
about?
not even 87. They're like, she's like, well, actually, I was born in 1936. I had no idea.
Wow.
Now, this is why.
How did it happen?
Because her sisters were calling her from Korea and like Boston saying, are you going to do
No,
something
how
for
did this mistake happen?
okay. This is where historically it's quite interesting. Back in the day, babies died, right? They didn't last a year. Sometimes they would not last 100 days. So even Koreans to this day, they celebrate the 100-day birthday of a baby.
Right.
So a year was like really unheard of oftentimes of babies living that long. And so they would hold off on officially registering the birth of a child until they knew it was going to live.
Right.
Okay.
Oh,
So
wow.
oftentimes that would
And
be.
this is during occupation too.
This
so
was
again.
exactly.
Yeah.
So this is so my mom's actual birthday, real birthday, is March 4th, 1936.
March 4th, not
March.
February
No.
11th.
No. So
they just trotted her and
for
said,
almost
okay, you can register now
yeah,
because
For almost a year, they did not register her birth until February 11th, 1937.
So her birth certificate says February because she was registered that day.
Correct. And that year, 1937. But her actual birth year is 1936, and her actual birth date is March 4th. I mean, talk about like, whoa, you know, so my mom is at a year older than I thought this in my entire life.
But she's known this all her life, and she just lived this lie?
All
Yeah. Why do my kids need to know? It's not their business.
I mean, seriously, my brother and I are like, I go, did you know this? He's like, no. Did you know? I'm like, no, I had no idea.
Apparently, you guys were the only ones who didn't know.
Exactly.
Everybody else knew.
All her sisters and brothers knew. And I'm like, how the hell did no one tell us, her children? So anyway, so now we're planning.
Are the best that way. Aunties will always spill the beans. You want to know something about your parents? You go ask your auntie.
It's so true, but I didn't even think of it. So now my brother and I are planning a big 88th birthday for her.
Yeah. It's
because
like in the year, and the years are going. Oh my God.
March 4th. So we decided, okay, March 4th, your real birthday, we will have this 88th birthday party.
Yeah, because I can't plan it in 2 days.
No,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. We were thinking, oh my God, do we have to do it this Saturday? You know, but no. Anyway, so there you go.
That is so funny.
I just learned something new about my mother that I never knew my entire life. So
you know what I did? I just got one of those storybook thingies where you buy this book online and you give it to your parents or whoever, your partner or whatever. And there's all these questions that they fill out. So you can get to know them better. And then they put them together and make it a book.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Isn't that so great? My mom is 85, going to be 85. And I thought, what a great way to get to know my mother better.
Yeah.
And then to just have it all documented. So one day, if my niece ever decides to have children, right now she's like, I don't want to have kids. She's learning from her auntie. But you know, I mean, what a great way for her to also have this exercise and know that people care about, you know, her past.
That's a good idea. Yeah. I love that idea.
I just caution you to, you know, just prepare you, because asking those same types of questions to my mother, she'll always react. Why do you want to know? It's not important. It's that's how I lived. That was, you know, I lived through war. That's how it was. It's like, and why do I? So prepare yourself. It's like it's for your grandchildren.
Yeah,
you know,
or grandchildren.
It's for your grandkids, because your grandkids are probably want to know how you grew up, what you thought of things, what was your favorite, this and that.
I always tell people to videotape. Video or record, not videotape, or like record.
And they have the technology.
Yes, record your parents before they get too old, before you know they're gone, especially if they're immigrants, right?
Yeah. Those stories are so good
about how they got there and what, you know, what they had to do to survive, and you know what they had to overcome when they got to the United States. Everyone has such an amazing story.
It's so
it's
true.
never easy.
And then also because that's the important information, the history information, but to find the personal stuff, the real personal stuff, how they eat a bowl of rice, how they look at you. If you know a question that pesters, that it's a pestering question that you keep on asking them, it's like, Mom, why do you put so much soy sauce in your fish? It's like, you know, it tastes good. You know, something that we know because we grew up with it, but it's that personal, you know, that touch that's very unique, that, you know, you can have fun with your, you know, nieces and nephews as to why grandma's like this. It's just like,
absolutely.
You know, why does she, it's that's the fun stuff. That's the gold.
Yeah. We have to preserve those stories before they're gone, you know, and that's my big regret with my father, because he was taken so suddenly and unexpectedly. I wish I had sat down with him and really gotten some of those personal stories and those details about his life. It really is so important to document. So good idea, Kelly. Thank you for that idea. Shifting gears, last episode we talked about Lunar New Year that was coming up, and obviously it's now happened since then. Unfortunately, as we all know, during Lunar New Year, the most terrifying, horrific thing happened, which was the mass shooting in Monterey Park, followed by Half Moon Bay. And this was a story that shocked everyone because, so many people were killed within Asian communities. And then the shooters were also Asian, two elderly Asian men, right? And so I think it just was a double whammy for all of us. And so I think we've been talking about this, but we wanted to bring somebody in to talk about this issue because it's so multi-layered. And our mutual friend, we all are good friends with Jeff Yang, who is an author and columnist and man of who wears many hats. But he wrote a really, really powerful op-ed in the New York Times recently. And it was called The Terrifying Sign of Assimilation. And so we wanted Jeff to come on to talk about the op-ed, but also all the different issues, the complicated issues that surround, what's been going on. So let's go to that interview. Jeff Yang, welcome to the show. Good to see you.
Good to see you guys too. And
Hi.
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 Oh my gosh. I have to say, I said it when we were waiting in the green room, as it were, and I'll say it again for the broadcast, that I feel genuinely privileged and honored to be on this podcast in this conversation with three such incredibly talented and successful and powerful and beautiful women. And all three of you are people who've been inspirations to me, to the community. The fact that the three of you have gathered together for this thing is constantly mind-blowing to me. But again, for me to be here it's just fills the heart.
We can say the same about you, Jeff, and all of your accomplishments and all of your continued contributions. And that's why we wanted you to come on this particular show, because this is the first show that we're doing since the shootings happened in Monterey Park and Half Moon Bay. And you wrote such a wonderful, profound piece for the New York Times recently called The Terrifying Sign of Assimilation. And you touch upon some of the subjects that we want to cover, but let's just first just talk about the fact that these shootings occurred and, they happened on Lunar New Year. And they happen at a time when we're still struggling with what's been going on for the last couple of years with COVID-19 and all the anti-Asian hate. So I think I can speak for all of us, right? When this happened, it was like, oh, hell no. You've got to be kidding me.
Yeah,
right?
Collectively.
So Jeff, tell me, before we get to the details of this opinion piece that you wrote, what were your thoughts when this all happened?
Yeah, well, when it actually happened, I'm obviously I've lived here in Los Angeles for the last 9 years, and it's now my home. I've kind of gotten used to the fact that I'm now an Angelino as far as that goes, an adopted one. But I'm from New York originally, and I was with my parents for Lunar New Year. It's a time of family and of gathering, but my father has been not incredibly well over the years since actually COVID. It was a time when I think a lot of elder people found themselves in situations where the combination of social isolation.
Right.
I don't know how much success.
About it. You documented the struggles with going with that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It was really remarkable because it's like a stop motion effect. Before COVID, you see your family members and they're one way, and then after 2 years of just talking to them remotely, you see them in person, and the world has changed, and they have as well. And yeah, so my dad had not been doing well, and after the lockdown gradually opened up, he ended up being hospitalized for a while for a fall, and during that period, it just he got a little bit disconnected from things around him. It became much more important, basically, for me and my sister to spend more active time with him. So we've been trying to always be there for holidays where possible, at least one of us with our families when we can. Lunar New Year was important for my parents. They're first generation immigrants from Taiwan. And it was always a time for us to gather, at least as a nuclear family, if not as a giant, big, extended family. And we haven't had those extended family gatherings, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the group mass celebrations has been so rare for our communities, especially.
Was it your first Lunar New Year together since pandemic? Did you gather last year, or was this the first?
This was the first, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
so there you go. Yeah.
and so, you know, my dad has been at a facility, kind of doing rehab and so forth, and we brought him out. We went to a Chinese restaurant, and we had dinner, and then we went back to my parents' house for the weekend. You know, thinking that on Sunday morning we would just do the rounds, right? Make the phone calls, make the Zooms, etc., with all relatives, because that's traditional. And instead, you know, when we woke up, there already were a lot of texts and messages that were coming in. My parents are still asleep. I opened these up and I said, "What is going on?" You know, there are people reaching out from all over. Instead of saying Happy New Year, they were saying, "Are you guys okay? We heard something happened in you know, Los Angeles." Yeah. I will say, by the way, people outside of Los Angeles have no idea the geography of Los Angeles.
No, it's so true. It's so true. They think like we're all in the same area. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Well, same as New York. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Oh my God. It's like, yeah.
Right.
That's true.
But
people were
especially Los
freaking
Angeles,
out.
because
Yeah.
you know, the notion of East Side and West Side, and the fact that there's potentially like an hour and a half with traffic gap between the two.
Exactly.
There's no context. So anytime anything happens, a fire, a flood, you know, or in this case, a just horrible human tragedy and an act of atrocity, right? People assume that it happened right next door to you. So all these people are saying, "Are you guys okay? Did you have to take cover? You know, where are you now? Are you safe?" And I had no context because we were just waking up, and this had it happened very early in the morning, our time, in New York on East Coast time. So once I actually looked on Twitter and other social networks and saw what happened, it just shook me, because I knew when my parents woke up, they're going to freak out. I mean, this is Monterey Park. This is where the town. I mean, we have relatives and friends who live right near there. You know, right in you know, blocks away, and cousins of ours are ballroom dancers. You know, and enjoy doing that, like many other immigrant families, as a way to get away from the hard work they do on a regular basis. And so,
but
this
Jeff,
was just
let me ask you this: Did you, like the rest of us, immediately think, "Oh my God, this was a hate crime"? The perpetrator. I mean, I immediately thought the perpetrator was going to be somebody white or at least non-Asian, right?
Well,
I mean, what did you have that response? No, Tamlyn, you're shaking your head. You didn't think so?
I'm not. I think I've gotten used to not assuming anymore.
Yeah, smart.
Yeah,
actually, that's smart.
I did the same for a split second, and then I thought, what if it's not? How much more horrible is it if it is somebody Asian?
Yeah.
So
I mean,
what I'll say is, part of the reason why this one was such a particular punch in the gut is because, as I mentioned in the piece I wrote, this was a horrible replay of something that had happened, you know, months before, right?
Laguna Woods.
Yeah. Laguna Woods, at this Taiwanese American church, where we actually did have relatives who were in the congregation. They weren't there for the actual shooting, but they were, because they happened to be traveling. But the proximity with which gun violence had already come into our worlds, into the Taiwanese American community, was that much more profound and real for us, because we knew people who had to flee. We knew people who had blood spattered on them, or who were almost trampled when people were fleeing. It was one of those things where the gut reaction was, "Oh my gosh, somebody is attacking Asians," because we've been attacked so often over the last couple of years. But the Laguna Woods precedent was enough to make me think, maybe let's take a step back and see what is going on. You know, and I saw that a lot of other people were already advancing this thought. You know, this clearly, it's on Lunar New Year. It's a time when Asians gather together, Chinese in particular, right, in large masses. Of course, this feels like something that potentially could be a targeting from the outside. But I mean, Kelly, like you said, I had that moment and then I paused and I had the sinking feeling, like you said, Tamlin, that maybe this was something we should take a step back from.
Yeah.
And when we found out the reality of it, I will say, it was not just heart wrenching, but it was particularly heart wrenching because all of the people who were then talking about it from the frame of, oh, it's another Asian shooting Asians, right?
Right.
Yep.
It was infuriating to see
Yep.
how triumphalist some of the commentators on different platforms were. They were overjoyed
Yeah.
that Asians who were just so self-victimizing during this pandemic, well, it's them. They're the ones doing it to themselves now. And I know this is something that communities of color get a lot.
I was just going to
But
say, it's what you hear when people say, "Oh, it's just black on black crime," right?
mm,
And they dismiss it as that. So in the
it,
same vein, it was with this, and then of course Half Moon Bay, which was
Right.
another older Asian man who was the
mm.
perpetrator. So yeah, I mean, back to back like that, that made that discussion even hotter, didn't it?
Yeah, and we didn't even have 24 hours to breathe, right? Before all of a sudden it was a pattern. And
Yeah.
I think that's the most terrifying thing in some ways. There's a sense in which obviously Asian Americans have been held up to the frame of being, again, the special community, the model minority, the ones who've
Right.
overcome all our boundaries and differences and succeeded in spite of them. And I mean, we all know how false that is, especially when you look at both individuals and at the wide spectrum of Asian America.
Right.
But it's moments like this when you realize how thin that scrim is, how much of a farce that facade is, that we are accepted, that we are welcomed, that being Asian American is the next best thing to being white,
Right.
if you will, right?
Yeah.
Because all the commentators who were then pointing the finger at us exactly the same way, like you said, May, black on black violence, Asian on Asian violence, those terms, the Asian on Asian violence thing made me scream because it really did reinforce this idea that these killers in particular, as Asian immigrants, right, as people who came from elsewhere and who were largely blue collar, working class, or even just marginalized individuals,
Right.
those aren't the Asians that they're talking about when they say model minority, when they say overachievers,
Right.
whiz kids, right? But these are also the people who we don't talk about enough in our own communities.
Yeah.
And then
Exactly.
when we get all lumped together with them, when it becomes Asian on Asian violence, when it becomes, people who are underemployed and older and immigrant shooting people who live in fairly wealthy and affluent communities like Monterey Park, who are also Asian American and immigrant, right? Do people know to tell the difference? Do they care? That's really always been the question.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, so it does lead me to, this subject of the fact that there is this difference, right? There's a socioeconomic difference. There's an immigration difference of when they arrived and how they arrived and how much they arrived with or without and all of that, right? And so these three shooters, all in their 60s and 70s, immigrated as adults, right? And as you point out in your piece, they all had some sort of issue with, relationship, or they were isolated, they were lonely, they were angry, all of these things. But we can't just dismiss it as that either, can we? Because I think it's so complex, it's so multi-layered when you talk about these men, especially these Asian older men who probably have so much that they have, just held within, internalized, right? We hear the term self-hate, internalized racism, all of that stuff that never comes out, right? Do you think, and I mean, I have my own theories too, but I'm wondering how everybody else thinks about this. Do you think this is a problem that is only going to get worse due to this crazy world we live in? What do we all think about that? That this is an issue that is plaguing, our community, but certainly elderly or some of our elders male traditionally who don't want to open up. They don't want to seek help. They don't want to admit to vulnerability or weakness. And so when you lock that away for so long, perhaps decades, some of that anger or frustration or pain or depression, is it going to come out somehow? And is this proof that it's going to come out sometimes in the most violent way?
I mean, we sort of touched on that in our last podcast, coincidentally,
Mm.
when we talked about mental health
Yeah.
and, the Asian community and how we as a community do not traditionally seek help. We don't go to therapy or, especially the older generation. It's considered a weakness, right? It's considered shameful
But
to say that
men
you are in
especially.
therapy.
Yeah, but men especially, I don't want to generalize here, but I think we kind of have to a certain extent. Because look, we probably all have the same experiences with Asian men in our lives, especially our fathers and grandfathers. My father was a psychiatrist, you guys, but at home, he was Korean dad.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So
Yeah.
there was a separation even with my own father, who was a psychiatrist. So I can't imagine others who come from a very traditional background like most of our families. So these men, marginalized, come to this country with hardly anything, and they're still being made to feel like the other and not seen. So, is this something that we need to, like what you're saying, we need to talk about it, right?
And I think it's incumbent upon the younger generations to teach the older generations because they simply don't know how. It is burdensome to expect our elders to know of this, to just put away the shame that's associated with self-help, with therapy, with communicating, integrating our feelings with and emotions with our intellectual thoughts and comments on society. But this is something that really is something that I think the younger generation can learn how to teach the older generation, my generation, our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, because this is what we're feeling in society in general. It's the terminology, it's the pronouns, it's the correct vocabulary, it's their slang as well. But it's the absolute ability and the privilege to be able to talk about it and to recognize that it is a Western it's Western medicine to be. I don't know. I can't speak at all to what psychology is in Asia, in East Asia or in South Asia. But it's a phenomena that I find with not only Asian American cultures, but other Americans of ethnic cultures. It's like to be able to say that I'm in therapy is like, whoa, that's so American of you. But again, it's not a shame thing, and I have to get over it, but our younger kids, nieces and nephews, they're absolutely willing and open, not only to go to therapy to see their therapist, but to be able to communicate with their groups of friends and try with their parents. And I think this is the circularity about trying to teach one another, and it doesn't always come from the top down.
I would say that I generally do absolutely agree that there is a profound gap, I think, in terms of access to and willingness to embrace things like, mental and emotional health supports, right? And part of it is access, right? It's culturally sensitive, linguistically appropriate, and affordable, right? Especially for these men who we're talking about. They were cycled out of those systems. They didn't have necessarily the capacity, much less the cultural or personal, perhaps, predilection and willingness to embrace that kind of treatment. But I also think, and I'm going to kind of go a little more personal here, I see what several years worth of the pandemic did, worth of pandemic lockdown did, even to my kids. And even though they're of a generation who are much more willing to talk about their concerns and their hearts and their feelings to one another, and maybe even to their parents to a certain extent. Kids will always be a little bit like, there's some things I'm not going to tell you. But even their feelings of isolation, loneliness, and removed from the world were huge and profound. And that's kids. Now, you look at these three men, and you look at a lot of people in this elder generation, especially among immigrants, and what you see is these were individuals who were, generally speaking, cut off even from the communities that they were capable of interacting with prior, right? Ballroom dancing, Lunar New Year gatherings. The reason why those are so important to our communities is because they couldn't, the elders who engaged in these things couldn't do them for the better part of 3 years. And in that period of time, they instead were at home, huddled, first in fear of the virus, which they saw decimating people or causing entire parts of Asia to shut down entirely, right? Again, also removing their ability to even travel and visit their relatives, their friends who were abroad. And then as time went on, they were fortressed up against this larger fear of anti-Asian hate, of violence that seemed as if it was propagating. And the one thing that they were connecting on was these digital platforms that are particularly tuned to immigrants. Now, I don't want to make too big of a centrality for this kind of the digital role of disinformation, for instance, in what happened with these particular shootings, because isn't clarity, as to whether or not anything occurred that points to a trigger, to use a terrible choice of words, right? Any kind of stimulus that might have encouraged violence or led to violence. But I can see, even from my own parents, the degree to which the kind of communication occurring during the pandemic. I was plugged into Line and WhatsApp, some of the platforms my parents were using, and they would occasionally share with me things that they were getting from their friends. And I'd have to reverse translate them from Chinese back into English again. But there were some screeds that terrified me. There were things that felt like white supremacist manifestos. There were broad-based attacks on people of different cultures and races that were going around saying that for Asian American older people, these groups were targeting Asians, right? And what I want to point to, and this is something I talk about in the column, is even if this didn't actually lead to direct violence or violent desires on the part of these three men, what it has done is it has encouraged people to purchase weapons, right? Because this is America. And in America, when there's a problem, we shoot at it, right? When there's a fear, we defend ourselves. We defend ourselves because the one thing we see on TV, the one thing we hear again and again in headlines, the one thing that certain parts of our community, our society, our politics constantly say is the only thing that can defend you is to have a weapon at your side. And so you see these three men purchasing weapons. Who knows why they purchased them, but certainly it's easy enough to do so. And during the pandemic, the number of Asian Americans who own firearms increased by 43%.
43%. Yeah.
It's mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing, but Jeff, I mean, you in some ways you can understand that fear led to this, this incredible increase in people wanting guns because people were so terrified. I'm certainly not suggesting that was the answer, but it does correlate, doesn't it? So that fear, that intense fear that was building for over 3 years plus, that's why this number shot up like this. And so I thought that was a brilliant point to make in your piece, because people have to understand that, this is all connected. It is all connected in a terrible way.
Again, this is not a direct one-to-one thing, with these crimes in particular. But what you see is on the one hand, the heat rising, right? The heat being turned up and people's fear and anger in many cases boiling. Yeah. On the other hand, guns, they're readily available. Even during the pandemic, gun shops were open and people were purchasing them at this ridiculous rate. Not just Asian Americans, but among Asian Americans who generally, historically have been anti-gun, right? Yep. Pro-gun reform and gun control. They come from, cultures. We come from cultures. Our immigrant parents certainly come from cultures where no one has guns, right?
Right.
They had to come here to come
Yeah.
to a culture where guns were embraced, celebrated, and distributed fairly readily to anybody who wants them. And so all of a sudden, you have people who are paranoid, fearful, angry, isolated, who do not have a real means to connect with other people, to confirm or disconfirm what's going on in their lives, or even outputs, healthy outputs to relieve any kinds of stresses or emotions. Meanwhile, you have guns, and then you have whatever the proximate cause was, right? Anger at over political differences, or rage at being not invited to a party, or anger at coworkers for perceived slights. It doesn't matter what the actual stimulus is. When you've got something next to you that can cause devastating harm to another human being, to many of them at once in these cases, you will use it. And that is the biggest issue here.
Yeah.
When I wrote in my New York Times op-ed that in some ways, what you really see is the only real pattern across these three. Yes, there are other things, right? They are all Asian immigrant men of a certain age and generation, like you mentioned. They're all people who came as adults. They all have lives that were sort of marginal, and they didn't have the kind of wealth that they thought they would perhaps achieve in coming to America and all the prosperity promised by the American dream. But the one thing they could get, because it's cheap and easy, the one part of the American quote unquote dream that is really our American nightmare that they could get is guns. And so they got those. And to the extent that more than anything else is the kind of signifier of assimilation into a kind of American culture that we hate to think about. But when you go abroad, right, if you visit Japan or Korea or Taiwan or anywhere, right, the first thing that people will say to you, if you ask them to describe what America is to them it's a place where everybody has guns.
Yep.
And at any minute you get into a fight with somebody, you will have lead flying. That is America to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's such a sad picture. And that's why I love the last line. And I mean, it's, very powerful what you've said. Mass murder may be the fullest act of assimilation possible into a culture that is proudly chosen as its colors the red of innocent blood, the white of panicked eyes, and the hazy blue of semi-automatic smoke. Can't say it any better than that, sadly. Jeff, I'm curious what the reaction to this op-ed has been.
Yes. Yes, because actually, I think, I don't know if Kelly and Mac may, I'm sure you guys have, but on Twitter, you would, you were really anticipating the feedback in the days before releasing the article in order to prep all of us. But I had, in just in case we needed to come to, but I didn't see any maliciousness or vilification of your piece. It was just a sobering kind of look as to what it means to be American in one aspect. So what was
the reaction?
Well, I'll say this. I think among Asian Americans, I was afraid that by framing it this way, there might be people who would accuse me of trying to humanize, mass murderers, people who brought mayhem to communities around them. I was afraid that some people might suggest that the larger affects, the things that were shaping the lives of these people, was somehow an excuse for what they did. And I wanted to make it clear straight up front that no, that was not what I was doing. The goal was not to rationalize or make reasonable what they did, but there was this connecting point that I thought was necessary to help people understand, number one, that ours is not a monolithic community, and that often the people we talk about least are the ones who are also most vulnerable, the most challenged. But also, there needed to be a way to get to this larger conversation around what it means to be both, Asian perhaps, but also American. And the only way to do that was to do it this way, I thought. But it took a lot. I mean, I think when I first kind of pre-shared that I was working on this piece, I just talked about how difficult it was to even get my head around to a place where I could write this. And part of it was, to be fully frank, I was with my parents, and although my dad is not great, he's not well right now. I remember a lot of conversations with my dad. My dad is like, I think, a fair number of older immigrants fairly conservative, right? I mean, very conservative. Let's just put it that way. And we would argue, we would talk about things from the perspective of him making points that and me being aghast. And that was just a big part of our relationship growing up through my adulthood, really, not even growing up, in my adulthood. But at the same time, he's also somebody who's incredibly warm and patient and kind and willing to bend when he gets to a place where he understands that things are different.
That's rare.
Yeah, it's very rare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but in this particular case, I mean, I will say the one thing that really affirmed for me something which I never expected was my dad going full 180 degrees on marriage equality, and stating that he genuinely believed that gay and lesbian people should be allowed to marry.
Wow.
And that came out of the blue, but I realized later that it was because one of my peers in my family, one of my generational peers, came out to him, being afraid to tell his own father that he was gay, and introduced his partner, and my dad, after meeting them, said, "Oh my gosh, they're warm and they're loving and it's a beautiful relationship. I should tell my eldest son about this." I'm like, "Why are you telling me now?" But anyway, so these are the things I know about my dad. At the same time, I also know that as he got older and as he got less well, especially as he got a little bit more disconnected and has gotten more disconnected from the world around him, there have been moments where he's gotten very, very angry at the changes occurring to him, angry at the things he couldn't do, angry at a world that he thought was incredibly unfair to him, angry remembering things. There are things in his career that he would just out of the blue share and say, "I remember this happened before I left he was a doctor many years. Before I left the hospital, this person said this thing to me," right? And it's still, and I'm,
That's what I'm saying, Jeff. I mean, I think there's so much pent up. There's so much that so many of us, all of us, keep a lot, internalize a lot, but of that generation in particular, and as Asians who are taught to keep everything in, right?
Yeah,
Not
just
share.
ignore it.
Just ignore it, keep
Don't
it
let
in,
it get to you.
internalize it, right? And so, after layer upon layer upon layer of that, right, of that hurt and pain and whatever, and dismissal, it's going to come out in some way, in some angry or rage form. But I'm certainly not suggesting that all of us are going to do what happened recently. But yeah, I think your dad is probably an example of that, as are so many others. My mom tells me still has memories of living through the war and living through the Japanese occupation and living through poverty. I mean, all of those things they've internalized, right?
And a lot of them have no one to talk about these things with. And a lot of them also get to an age where that talking is no longer even possible, right?
Right.
And I think that's where you see especially the profound impact of the pandemic and the closing off of their worlds as being something that both impacted them physically, psychologically, but also just closed off a lot of aspects of their world in a way that forced them to live in their own heads. And I look to your point, May, and to the point that I was trying to really underscore. You don't want to generalize and say either that this is a pattern that you can point to and say we're going to be seeing this again and again, nor do you want to dismiss the fact that we live in a culture now where, for many reasons, right, not least of which, once a precedent has been set, right, the reason why school shooting has become such a common thing is because the window of what is acceptable as a behavioral reaction to heartbreak or to bullying or to isolation and alienation gets expanded when you see in the news that somebody like you who faced your issues acted out in this way, and you have access to weapons that allow you to do it too. And they say a lot about how we don't want to use names and underscore glorify or even publicize the names of mass murders. But the names aren't even what's necessary. In some ways, just the fact that our culture allows it and we move on.
Yeah.
The fact that,
Over
we had
and
Sandy
over
Hook,
again.
and we had dozens of basically infants, toddlers being mowed down, and we moved on. The fact that we had Parkland.
Uvalde.
I
mean,
it
goes
not
on and
just moved on though, Jeff. There is a small community that is saying that it was fake.
Yeah.
So
gosh,
it's beyond just moving on and forgetting. There are people who are actually
claiming
out there who are saying that this is all made up, and that we are, a society of people who are just creating these stories for I'm not even sure what reason.
Yeah.
So it's there's really a sickness in this country that goes just beyond ignoring the situation, but other people who are out there, fighting it as though, there's a conspiracy of, lies that are being made up by I'm not even sure who they're blaming.
Yeah. I know.
I don't know.
Hollywood.
But it's certainly the plague of America, isn't it? And we seem to not find a solution every time. We do move on.
Truth is hard. Truth is hard,
but it's also, obviously it's political. It's also about money, and we all know that. But I wish we had the answer, and it doesn't seem to ever resolve itself after every mass shooting. And like you said, Jeff, even when little babies are massacred, it didn't change a damn thing, right? So I mean, I don't want to end this interview on such a negative note, but that's but that is the true reality. So I think discussions like this, where we have to face it, really face it, for all its ugliness, but really talk about it and get down deeper instead of scratching the surface and moving on. And so for our community, that's why I wanted to have this conversation. And because of Jeff, what you wrote about, we do have to dig deeper in terms of what is the cause, what's at the root, what's at the core. Let's peel back all of these layers and try to get to, what's happening, in our communities, and generational differences and cultural differences and all that. So it's a lot. It's a lot.
It is a lot, and I think it deserves and requires us to have conversations that are both painful, not just with our elders, with one another, with our kids, but I think as Asian Americans, with the larger construct that's been put up around us, right? The things that divide us as Asian Americans into different groups, and that also lead us to in some ways believe our own mythology, right? Believe that we're safe and happy and successful people who've just worked hard. Yeah, we have that, and we should not turn back on all of the good things that we've achieved. But I think that if we do so and ignore the very real continued challenges and deficits that parts of our community have, that can't be papered over simply by, more representation, more and better image. I mean, those things are critical because the way we're seen absolutely reflects and shapes who we are. But this whole thing has kind of given me a deep pause and led me to think, what can we do really? What can we do to bridge some of these existing gaps so that as we move forward, we're not leaving people behind? And I don't know the answer to that. I really don't.
Well, I think it's what you've done with this piece. It's what this conversation is about, trying to be really honest in whatever way we can be and have these conversations.
I'm not being facetious. Is it possible to have it translated and put it into the, our, specific language newspapers? Because it's an important piece. I mean, to be able to tell it from
that's a good point.
You're an ABC, right? You're American born Chinese, right? So it's again that kind of feeling that you're able to say as an Asian American who have Asian migrant parents and have a fully assimilated American kid, that's it's the focus and the view of youth that I think is important to be able to bridge those perspectives, the three perspectives between your generation, the three generations specifically in your family, and it speaks to so many, outside.
Tamlyn, that is so brilliant. And
Right.
I actually, I think it had come up at one point, but I totally forgotten. But you both reminded me and reinforced this idea that a lot of times, again, we just feel we're maybe just speaking to ourselves.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I may actually reach out to my mom to help
Yeah.
translate the
You
Chinese.
should.
Yeah, you should.
Honestly.
And
You really should.
and
Yeah.
again, and you know, I don't know what it, you know, it's the, because we know all the journalists out there, May, you know, it's like to be able to put it specifically in Taiwanese, Mandarin, Cantonese, you know, Vietnamese, the
Yeah.
Filipino,
Korean.
Japanese,
I mean,
you know,
yeah,
Korean.
yeah, absolutely.
It's super important to be able to put this New York Times opinion piece about speaking to the trauma that we're all
Yeah.
experiencing.
Because it is kind of a narrow, you know, readership, right? When you talk about the New York Times, especially opinion pieces, right? Not even all.
And it would relieve all the kids who know both languages of translating. Is like, Mom, you should read this article. I'll read it for you. You know.
Yeah.
Okay. See, that's something tangible that can be done. So Jeff, get on it. Seriously, I think that's a brilliant idea. But
no,
yeah.
honestly, this is the first podcast I've been on where there's been an active takeaway that I've got to actually call to action.
Leave it to the women. Come on. Yeah, this is why we do the show. But but Jeff, honestly, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. And I really was so glad when we were able to secure this interview with you, because I thought it was so important to talk about this, especially on the heels of the piece that you wrote and everything that's been going on and continues to go on. But, you know, continue to do the work, man. I know you are. So appreciate you.
Yes,
thank you
very much.
Thank you, May. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Tamlyn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank
you.
Well, we definitely appreciate Jeff sharing his time with us. And he's such a brilliant writer. And so he's so connected in terms of so many different issues that I knew he was absolutely the right person to talk to about this particular subject. So we thank him. So ladies, I guess that brings us to the end of another fantastic episode. I love you gals. I don't know when we're ever going to be in the same room together to do this.
Oh my goodness.
Are we ever?
Yeah. Well, we're all working, you know, in these crazy times.
I know.
Yeah, knock on wood.
Well, we'll make it happen. You know what? You know what we should do? We should make it a special episode. Like oh my God, they're all in the same room together. So we'll plan on that at some point when we can coordinate our schedules. But I love seeing you this way anyway. Whichever way we can get together. It's great.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for making time for us.
Yeah.
And, always being the great planner that you are, May.
I try, but whatever. It's fine. No. I love it, and I do it because I love it.
Kelly, you have to get up at 4:15.
I know.
Time. I do. I have to get up in just over 8
with
hours.
All the changes and everything, but it's wonderful to be in community with the two of you. So thank you for
thank you guys.
All right, my fellow badass ladies, take care, and we'll see you next time, everyone. Bye.
Aloha.
Thank you. Aloha.